Hello, I'm Tom Wilkinson, and welcome to the Thinking in English podcast, a podcast aimed at intermediate to advanced level English learners. Archaeologists recently discovered the world's oldest cave paintings of animals in an isolated cave in Indonesia. This has challenged the way scientists think about our history and provided evidence for people in Asia tens of thousands of years ago. Let's learn about this topic while studying some new English vocabulary. But first, why not follow the Thinking in English Instagram page, Thinking in English podcast, or the link is in the description. And you definitely should look at our blog, thinkinginenglish.blog, for all transcripts and bonus content. Here is today's vocabulary list. As always, the written list is available in the description of the podcast and also on our blog, thinkinginenglish.blog. Archaeologist. Archaeologist. An archaeologist is someone who studies the buildings, graves, tools, and other objects of people who lived in the past. For example, archaeologists have uncovered the remains of an Anglo-Saxon settlement. Remote. Remote. This means far away in distance, or a long way from towns or cities. For example, they live in a remote mountain village, miles from the nearest shop. Characteristic. Characteristic. A characteristic is a typical or noticeable quality of someone or something. For example, a big nose is a characteristic in my family. Capacity. Capacity. Capacity is someone's ability to do a particular thing. For example, she has a great capacity for hard work. To date. To date. If you date something, you say how long that thing has existed or when it was made. For example, archaeologists have been unable to date these fossils. Artifact. Artifact. An artifact is an object that is made by a person, such as a tool or decoration, especially one that is of historical interest. So, for example, the museum's collection includes artifacts dating back to prehistoric times. Reasonable. Reasonable. If something is reasonable, it is based on or using good judgment, and therefore fair and practical. For instance, if you tell him what happened, I'm sure he'll understand. He's a reasonable man. Sophisticated. Sophisticated. Intelligent or made in a complicated way, and therefore able to do complicated tasks. For example, I think a more sophisticated approach is needed to solve this problem. And finally, pigment. Pigment. A pigment is a substance that gives something a particular color when it is added to it. For example, pigment is mixed into oil, glue, egg, etc. to make different types of paint. For almost a year now, I have not enjoyed reading the news. I just find it all quite depressing. Unless there is a major incident or breaking story, the majority of top news articles on every site I use are always about the pandemic. I find myself skipping the negative stories and searching for something more positive or fascinating. For example, I found an article called Archaeologists Find the World's Oldest Animal Cave Painting on the BBC, and it really stood out to me. So, I want to tell you all about this article. A group of archaeologists in Indonesia have discovered the world's oldest known animal cave painting. On the wall of the Liang Tedongna cave in a remote valley on the island of Sulawesi, the researchers found an image of a wild pig. Incredibly, they believe that the pig was drawn around 45,500 years ago. That is so long ago, it is difficult to really comprehend. It is far older than any other known cave paintings. We are not sure how the humans at that time communicated, thought, or lived. Obviously, they used language, but we do not know what language or how sophisticated their language was. Animals, including the giant woolly mammoth, a relative of modern elephants, were still roaming the earth. It would still be another 40,000 years before we started using metal. In fact, we only started farming about 12,000 years ago. But this cave painting was drawn 45,000 years ago. It was painted in dark red and is actually the size of a real warty pig, which is the type of wild pig living on the island of Sulawesi. This surprised me because I was expecting the cave paintings to be much smaller and less detailed. It measures 136 centimeters by 54 centimeters and shows a pig with horn-like facial warts that are a characteristic of the adult males of the pig. In addition, there are two handprints above the back of the pig, which also appears to be facing two other pigs that are only partially preserved. According to Maxime Aubert, the co-author of the report, the people who made it were fully modern. They were just like us. They had all of the capacity and the tools to do any painting that they liked. Mr. Aubert is an expert in dating ancient artifacts, including paintings, and estimated the age of the cave drawings by analyzing a substance that had formed on top of the image. His test demonstrated that it was at least 45,500 years old. Moreover, it could be much older than that, because they tested the substance on top of it. The painting could have been there for years already before that substance. These cave paintings provide the earliest evidence of human settlement of the region. The Indonesian island of Sulawesi is in a key location. It's the largest island in a group of important islands known as Wallacea. This group of islands sits along a dividing line, either side of which you find very different animals and plants. I'm sure if you've ever seen any of the animals of Australia or New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, you notice how different they are from the animals of Asia, despite the fact the two places are relatively close. Well, Wallacea and the island of Sulawesi is the dividing line between those two regions. The area must have also been a stepping stone for modern humans as they made their way to Australia. We know that humans were present in Australia around 65,000 years ago, so it's reasonable to assume that they were also on Sulawesi at the same time, or even earlier. Therefore, there is possibly more art out there to be found, either on Sulawesi or a neighbouring island, that's older than 45,000 years old. Before the paintings in Indonesia were tested, the oldest known images of animals were all in Europe. The spectacular lions and rhinos of the Chauvet Cave in southeastern France are commonly thought to be around 30,000 to 32,000 years old, and mammoth ivory figurines found in Germany are from roughly the same time. These kinds of pictures or sculptures don't appear elsewhere until thousands of years afterwards. This led scientists to assume that humans in Europe were the first to develop sophisticated thinking. According to those scientists and their theories, once Europeans started painting, their skills could have spread around the world. However, The images in Sulawesi challenge this theory. In fact, the paintings in Indonesia were painted before humans were even permanently settled in Europe. How could Europeans have started painting first if there were already paintings in Indonesia? The paintings in Indonesia may be the world's oldest art depicting a figure or an animal, but it is not the oldest human-produced art. At the moment, that title belongs to a tiny set of lines sketched onto a stone found in South Africa, which according to scientists are approximately 73,000 years old. Archaeologists in South Africa have also found that the pigment ochre was used in caves 164,000 years ago. I'll say that again, 164,000 years ago. They have also discovered deliberately pierced shells with marks suggesting that they were strung like jewellery, as well as chunks of ochre, one engraved with a zigzag design. So, potentially we have been making art for far longer than we currently think. So here is today's final thought. The discovery of these ancient paintings in Indonesia is fascinating. A few years ago, I read the famous book Sapiens, which is all about the development and history of humans. I often think about how our ancestors lived. And there are so many unanswered questions. How did language develop? How did we spread around the earth? What were our early societies like? Cave paintings are maybe the only clue we have to how our ancient predecessors acted and thought. We can find bones that tell us what we look like, and artifacts that tell us where we lived and what they ate. But thinking is a much more creative process. And art can offer an amazing insight into their lives. Here are today's comprehension questions. As always, the written questions can be found in the description of the podcast and also on our blog, thinkinginenglish.blog. What animal was painted in the cave? When did humans arrive in Australia? Where was the oldest human-produced art discovered? Thank you for listening to today's episode of Thinking in English. Please share with your friends, check out our social media links in the description, and send us a message. We really appreciate all of your feedback. And if you have any ideas for topics or future podcast guests or any other learning format, please let us know. And please leave me a rating. We're now on Instagram. I'm sure you've already seen it, but go there, check it out. Lots of good content about vocabulary, pronunciation, and grammar. And Instagram is a great way to contact me. It's Thinking in English Podcast on Instagram, or the link is in the description. Also, all of the transcripts of the podcast are now available on the Thinking in English blog. Vocabulary list, comprehension questions, and all of the articles are there for you to read. That link is also in the description, so please check it out too. Thank you, and see you next time.